So when we were serving in the San Francisco Bay Area, I heard a story about a guy in the San Francisco who joined the volunteer fire department. San Francisco has a great professional firefighting department, and they can deal with almost everything that the forces of catastrophic events can throw at them, but every once in a while, they page the volunteers to give them a hand. And then who gets there first is assigned whatever duty needs to be done. And the guy I'm talking about had something like a midlife crisis. He sat in an office all day and he was dreaming of adventure, towering inferno-like adventure. So he saw himself creeping up the skyscraper, relying on sheer determination and fingernails. And then he saves 500 people all by himself and the mayor gives him a medal. That's what he dreamed about. And he got paged a couple of times, but he was always too late. The professionals had already done their duty, and instead of adventure, he did cleaning up. And then finally, one day, he gets there in time. There is just one person ahead of him, and that person is assigned an exciting duty, and then the chief turns to him and tells him, you go into that apartment and you find some shoes for that survivor that is treated by some EMTs over there. And he was so disappointed. He went and got the shoes, and the chief said, "Thank you." And then he sent him doing cleaning up duty. The guy was so disappointed, he thought about quitting. And he had already written his resignation when he read an article in the newspaper. And it was an article about the fire, how big it was and how dangerous and how brave the professional firefighters were in San Francisco, could never repay what the city owed them, and so on and so forth and so on. And it ended with an interview of the victim who lost everything. And that person told the reporter that this was the worst day of their lives, and they would not have made it through. They would have literally given up of life were it not for that angel firefighter who took the time to find them some shoes. You never, ever know the impact you will have on other people. Today we read the story about Dorcas. She was most likely a widow. Normally, women in the ancient world cannot be without male supervision. Either their father supervises women, or their husbands, or their sons. And if they don't have any male relatives, they usually cannot function in that ancient society and are cast out. But there are some exceptions. Sometimes women can inherit, and sometimes they can even become wealthy when their husband die and not destitute. The rules are one thing, and reality can be entirely something else. Some scholars assume that Dorcas is one of those wealthy women who sustain the ministries of Jesus and of the early church. Dorcas deals with cloth. As we read today, she makes clothing for the poor. Or if she's wealthy, some scholars speculate that she buys cloth and employs poor women to make clothes for the poor. Providing for those in need is a core feature of all early church communities. Before they figure out doctrines and hierarchies, the church in Jerusalem selects 7 deacons who take care of the earthly needs of the people. You have to eat first, and then you can contemplate who Jesus is and what Jesus saves you from and for. Martin Luther writes about the Lord's Prayer, and especially about the petition, "Our daily bread give us today," that this petition is not just asking for bread, but for a whole range of things that make life possible. We read, what is meant by daily bread? Everything that belongs to the support and needs of the body, such as food, drink, clothing, shoes, house, property, land, animals, money, goods, a devout spouse, devout children, devout workers, devout and faithful rulers, good government, good weather, peace, health, discipline, honor, good friends, faithful neighbors, and other such things. In the early 19th century, Dorcas societies emerged, which either provide clothing to the poor or which employ poor women to make clothing for the poor. And our sanctuary today is full of cloth or fabric. It is Quilt Sunday. What you see here are the quilts that our quilters made since last we had our sanctuary filled with the fruits of their labor. These quilts will go to Lutheran World Relief, and they will be shipped overseas, and they will be given to people who need them. And we don't know these people. And we will never know those people. And we do not know for sure if and how these quilts will make a difference. But as the story of the volunteer firefighter shows, we never know for sure what impact our actions have. But I think chances are good that these quilts will make a huge difference. Often natural disasters strike and force people from their homes, or war and violence uproot people and turn them into refugees. The United Nations estimate that there are currently 117.2 million displaced people seeking to survive somehow. And of course, one of the most efficient methods to help them is to give money to trusted organizations. But as the example from San Francisco shows, and as Martin Luther recognizes in what he writes about the Lord's Prayer, it makes a difference if on the other end of that quilt that keeps you warm is a credit card that purchased that quilt in China, or some people of faith who gathered in a church basement and turned cloth into quilts with their own hands. When you sit somewhere and take a breather from running away, it makes a difference that someone put effort and prayer into making the quilt that comforts you in that moment. There are many pieces that make a quilt. It takes precision to cut out the segments straight. It takes effort to stitch them together and to fill them with batting. And then there is, of course, that immaterial part of the process, the prayerful hearts that feel called to that ministry and the fellowship that accompanies the work and the joy that flows into making quilts and filling the whole sanctuary with them. A factory-made blanket keeps you warm, and that's good. But a Lutheran World Relief quilt also tells you that you are not forgotten. This quilt doesn't fix your problems, but like the shoes in San Francisco, it can help a desperate person to not give up, but to keep going. And if that would happen even only one time in the whole time the quilters have sent their quilts into the world, it still would have been worthwhile. The Jewish idiom says, "Who saves one person saves the whole world." Remember that big blast in Beirut a couple of years back? In 2020, a huge explosion destroyed the port of Beirut and much of the surrounding neighborhood. At the time, there were 2 containers of Lutheran World Relief quilts waiting for customs clearance. And everybody was sure those quilts were lost. But it turned out that even though the blast had wrecked the containers, the quilts inside stayed intact. They were not burnt and they were not chemically contaminated. They could be taken out of the containers and distributed. And that says to me one thing: love beats all odds. Amen.